I'd like to talk a little bit now about the world properties settings within Amorphium. You can get to the world properties three different ways. One is within the render panel. If you go into the render panel and go to world, there's the world properties button, which brings up the world properties. And you can also get there by clicking on the Mac or right clicking on the PC on the name of world in your project window and go to properties. Or you can just click the little world and it opens up the properties settings for the world, which the world represents your environment, the environment of your scene. So when I go to render right now, it's set for color environment, which means the background color is set to black right now. If I change this to a different color, then render this scene, like for example, if I go to a blue, I click done, then render a still image here, what I'll end up with is the background is now blue. So in the world properties, this is the adjustment for your background, and really it's adjustment for mostly the background, but then also allows you to adjust things like haze, which is like an overall world fog, so to speak. So the color is the properties for the background image of the render. So right now it's set to blue. Well, if I change this, let's go ahead and change this back to black. If I go ahead and go to texture, I can then open a texture. And now if I go to, let's grab the Lindo logo here. And it's going to scale, and you can see it's actually distorting the image a little bit, but it's going to put in the background any texture that I load in there. So now if I render this, and since I want it to be the same, I want it to be square, let's go ahead and make this 400. Now if I render this, the image is in the background. Of course the ball is covering up the logo in the background, but this could be any image you want. It could be like a background of sky or whatever, photograph, whatever you want it to be. So that's basically what the texture setting does. It allows you to put a texture in there or remove it. Distance is the distance from your camera. So whatever the furthest object is, always have this distance higher than the distance of the furthest object from the camera. So if the furthest object away from the camera in your scene is 1,000, then make sure that this is over 1,000 in distance, because you don't want your background to be closer to the camera than any of your objects, because it can cause some weird artifacts. Because basically this is a distance away from the camera your background texture is. Now, instead of a texture, you can actually have what's called sky and ground, and this allows you to put in a fractal based fake environment in the background that's generated on the fly based on colors that you give it. So if I want the sky to be more of a green, I can adjust that, and it's adjusting the sky there, as you can see. And if I want the ground to be more of a brownish color, just add a little bit of red, maybe a little bit of green, I can do that. Go back to, if I render this out, you can see now, well, my camera is of course pointed down, so you can't see it as well. Let me render that again. Because the horizon of the clouds is based on the axis here, this ground plane, if I move my camera down to be more of a horizon level and then render it, you'll notice that now you can see the clouds and the sky and the horizon. And the horizon is based on this grid, and so it's the midpoint is on the plane of where this grid is, where the 0 point of your world is. So if I tilt my camera like this and I animate this, you would actually see the horizon change in the background. which can be nice for putting an overall background to your animations. You can also animate your world properties as well, and animate the color changes and also the clouds, and that's what this tab is for changing the clouds. The frequency will change the amount of cloud pattern that you see there. They'll get more and more ornate as you change the frequency higher. The less frequency, there will be less detail in the clouds. So the more frequency, the more detail. And then coverage is how much is covering the sky and how much is not covering the sky. So if you were to adjust this real small, there's less clouds and more clouds. Now this can all be animated as well over time, and you can adjust whether or not you want the color to be pink, blue, or whatever you want, and then it's a gradient between these two. So if I were to take this and make it red, and then take this color and make it green, it's going to do a gradient between the lighter and darker levels that you saw originally between white and black. It was doing white and black between the clouds. Now it's doing this pink and green in the clouds. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back to black here and change this one back to white. These are all animatable as well. So you can animate all these settings. Offset, if I were to change this number, this actually moves the clouds along the horizontal. If I were to make this higher, or like make it a 10, or then make it 8 or 10, you can see that they're moving across the horizontal, where if I were to do offset on the Y and make it like 10, now it's moving in and out of the screen. So you can adjust your offset here to actually change the movement of the clouds. So you can actually animate these and set keyframes for these, and it will actually animate the clouds over time, which can be useful for background effects for scenes that you build. Now, another nice thing about this is if I go to Material and let me set high reflectivity, well, it's about halfway with reflectivity. Now if I render this, your environment will, when you're using clouds in your world properties, like I have here, what it will do is it will actually render them in your reflections. So if you want a generic reflection on your object, you can do that. So you can see it reflecting now the world environment in the ball. So the last thing I want to talk about in the world properties is the haze. Now in haze, what this does is gives it overall basic haze in the distance, as you can see there, which, like as atmospheres, you're looking in a real world. If you look through atmosphere, even though it'd be a clear day, mountains way in the distance will kind of have blue haze to them because of the atmosphere being thick going all the way to the mountains. It's going to start to fade into the background a little bit, into the haze of the atmosphere. And this allows you to reproduce that look. And so the opacity changes how transparent that haze is. Of course, they bring it all the way down, it's completely transparent. Bring it all the way up, it's really solid. Now you can change the color, of course, and then you have width. And if width is all the way up, then it's really thin. It's a really thin line of haze right at the horizon line, where if you bring it all the way down, the haze starts to fan out. And as objects get further away, they'll disappear into the haze a little bit too, which is nice. It blends it in with the background. But that's basically how haze works. So if I'm going to go ahead and bring the haze up quite a bit, I'll hit cancel there. Let me just go ahead and move my object off into the distance a little bit. Let's really move him out there. So now, if I go ahead and render this, You can see I'm starting to fade into the haze a little bit. It's a little more hazy now than if I brought the object closer to the camera. And that's because I turned the width really high and turned the opacity way up, and so that the object is actually blending into the haze in the background a little bit. And that's basically how you can adjust your world properties to change your environment a little bit to match better the type of scene that you're trying to build.